Hello. Making no eye contact with you. Yeah, so welcome to Operationalizing. Thank you very much for coming. We're really excited to be hosting this evening. Thank you so much for making it across. So I'm going to talk a bit about, well, a few things essentially. I'm going to talk about how we're using data at Lost My Name to create impossibly personalized storytelling. So I head up the BI and data science team here. Joined about 9 months ago to set up the team, and we've come a long way, and we're really proud of what we've managed to achieve. And so we wanted to kind of share some of that with you, talk a bit about what we're experimenting with, and hopefully get some sort of really great input from such a talented room. So I'm going to talk a bit about Lost My Name. How many here actually you've heard of Lost My Name before? Like literally by show of hands. Okay, more than I thought actually. That ruins by a joke about marketing, not target. But anyway, fine. We're essentially a startup that we've been going for about 3.5 years, and we've been using data, as I say, for the last sort of, in a big way, in the last year or so. And so I'm going to talk a bit about the team, kind of what we've got set up, and then kind of get into the guts of it around how we're using data. And so I watched a few of the videos from the festival, and some of them are quite detailed on one or two subjects. I'm going to try and sort of cram in quite a lot of topics and hopefully sort of keep your interest up. Some of the things I'll be talking about are quite a high level of detail. If anyone's interested to know more, then just come and grab me afterwards, and we can have a chat about it. Okay, so about Lost My Name. What we do at Lost My Name is we create impossibly personalized products for children. Our mission is to give every grown-up creative superpowers to make magical and meaningful connections with children. And so, like, it's very nice, but what does that actually mean? It means we make really beautiful personalized products for children. Some of our books and our games and our decor and things like that are sort of lying around, so feel free to have a flick through. But we kind of have our hero product, Lost My Name, the original book, and obviously the current name of the business will be rebranding later this year, so look out for that. We have another couple of books, The Journey Home and Kingdom of You, which just launched, and we're starting to sort of bring out some additional projects, so kind of games, milestone cards for newborns, and some decor as well. And we've got a really exciting roadmap coming this year. I just want to spend a little bit of time explaining the books and the products, because it helped me explain some stuff later on, so bear with me. But Lost My Name, which is, we've sold well over 2 million of this. It's one of the best-selling children's picture books ever. We're sort of not in the charts because we're not a publisher. We publish everything ourselves. We make it ourselves. But in pure number terms, we're pretty huge. And Lost My Name is kind of a simple story. It's about a child who sort of wakes up, can't remember their name, kind of goes on this journey to find their name, and sort of encounters various characters and creatures along the way. So I would meet the robot, who gives me an R, the Yeti gives me a Y, the Aardvark gives me an A, and the Narwhal gives me an N. I slightly embarrassingly thought Narwhal was a made-up creature, but apparently it's real. It's like a dolphin with a sort of jousting sort of stick coming out of his head, but they are real. It's not made up. But so it's a pretty simple story, but it's a really beautifully illustrated, beautifully written. Parents love it. It's obviously got this kind of universal appeal around the child's name, and sort of we sell, as I say, quite a lot of them. And so from that, we've started for the first time looking at kind of extension products, using the IP from Lost My Name, but using it in a card game called City Snap, where it's a fairly classic game of Snap, except we also include the children in the deck as well. You can put up to 2 children in the deck and play Snap. And instead of saying Snap, you've got to make the animal noise or get more excited, and it's a lot of fun. The poster again was something that we did as an extension product, and it's done pretty well for us. And we recently launched milestone cards for newborn babies, and I'll talk a bit about why we did that later on. The Journey Home is our second book, which I'll talk a bit more detail about later on, so I wanted to introduce it to you. So basically it's about a child who sort of dreams that they go on this kind of space adventure and they get lost in space, essentially have to find their way home. And again, it's really beautifully illustrated, it's really beautifully written. And the personalization mechanics in this are pretty fun. Like, the child sees the name in the stars, the kind of country of where they live is on the side of the spaceship. You can put anything in the name, I discovered, so I was kind of thinking, play around with data is cool. I hit the character limit with big data is cool, so I had to kind of settle on hashtag big data. But I was very impressed that you could put hashtags in it as well. We haven't sold any of those, but it's the technology essentially is kind of creating these products on the fly and being rendered on the fly. And again, in this story, as essentially the child gets closer to their home, they start seeing the outline of the country. They see a famous landmark from the city, culminating in actually seeing a satellite image of their house, which is pretty awesome. Given sort of the idea and the execution of it. That isn't what Pritchard's Road looks like, obviously. So we've kind of used a prettier picture for that. It's a really incredible book. Again, in its own right, it's sold an absolute ton, and it's doing really well for us. And finally, really excited to talk about Kingdom of You, which we literally just launched last week, and we're just starting to sort of plan our we're starting to sort of launch our marketing activity around it. So Kingdom of You is an incredible story, incredibly, again, beautifully illustrated and written. It's about a child, effectively, who gets told off that they're being a bit lazy and their room's a mess, and so sort of wishes that they were the king of the world. And so the laundry genie comes out and grants them the wishes, and so they get to be king of their own world. And I mean, you won't see it necessarily from where you're sitting, but the level of sort of detail, personalization within the sort of illustrations are really stunning and really complex, but very rich in detail and very, very exciting. And so you get to choose your favorite thing. I chose princesses because why not? They're pretty cool. So the kingdom becomes filled with princesses, and you also get to choose. You get to choose your favorite food. And so I went for pizza. And it's all going very well for the kid. They're having a lot of fun until basically their greed, the food that they chose. It could have been ice cream, pasta, chicken nuggets, etc. Essentially turns into a monster, and sort of goes on the rampage essentially within the kingdom. That there's the monsters eating the princess car. It's sort of trampling the kitten orphanage. That's a princess stuck in the monster pizza's butt. So yeah, it's pretty. It all goes wrong. Eventually, the kid has to figure out with their sort of friends how to defeat it. They defeat it. The kingdom's left in a mess, and they have to kind of clean it up. So it's kind of got this nice story arc. It's got this kind of moral tale at the end, but basically it's just a fun romp of a book. It's really lovely, and we're really excited about it. And so far it's going pretty well. And so just to explain what the sort of journey looks like for those who haven't seen it. The parent or the gifter would go onto the website, enter the child's name, choose a character and the gender. In the Kingdom of You, they would again choose the theme of the book and the characters, or they would choose the favorite food, and the book gets rendered sort of dynamically on the page, which they can preview. They're also able to add a personalized dedication, which is given our products are obviously very personalized. We do see that a lot of customers add sort of personal messages and really adds that we've learned, it really adds to the kind of gifting experience for the buyer. Okay. So what are we? Well, we're definitely a creative company. As I said, we design and sort of make all of our products ourselves. We're definitely a technology company. I mean, the algorithms to get sort of names in the stars and princesses into pizza butts is pretty awesome. But kind of fundamentally, we were also essentially an e-commerce business. Like we sort of do all our own. We sell directly. We manage our operation. We build our own website. And one of the really exciting things about BI at Lost My Name is we get to support all of that. We get to support marketing, shop, which is our sort of website team, the guys who sort of build and develop our beautiful website, operations. But also, what's kind of interesting, and I'll touch upon a little bit later on, is sort of how we also support the creative design process. So kind of we do all the things you would probably normally expect to see in an e-commerce business, but we've also got this really exciting opportunity to use data in a way that I think is pretty unusual and pretty interesting. You guys, everybody likes to talk about their infrastructure, so I'm going to touch upon it. We're sort of like big data, I think, in terms of like the breadth of things that we have. We're a relatively new business, so we don't have that many petabytes yet, but we will. But what we do have is a real variety of information. So we obviously pull a lot of information from our own platform, our order management system. We take a lot of data from all of our marketing partners, so we're on all of the sort of channels that you'd expect. All of our email information we pull in as well. We take, of course, our data from our website. So we use Optimisely for running our A/B tests, which is great. We get the hit level data for that, which is of course really useful. Google Analytics we have for our web logging and our tracking, which we take out of BigQuery. We also do a lot of kind of customer surveys. We do a lot of kind of qualitative customer surveys, which you'll see some of in a little bit. We also do a lot of quantitative customer surveys. So whether that be on site using a tool called WebEngage or Typeform, which is sort of emailing out to customers, and kind of you'll see some examples of how we're sort of linking that and integrating that data together with all the other information we have and the way that we harness the kind of customer detail that we get as well. And then just basically loads of other stuff. So the usual things like Zendesk for operations and contact center, our payment data. We take a lot of information literally out of kind of spreadsheets that they break quite a lot, but we need to sort that out. But it gives us just a lot of flexibility if we do need to kind of get some user level information. And so that gets managed in our ETL for a really nice tool called Luigi, which if you haven't heard of is fantastic actually. It is built by Spotify. It's a Python framework that essentially manages the ETL, so it manages the jobs, manages the sort of dependency flow. Is that right? Yeah, cool. And it's available on GitHub, so I'd recommend anyone to kind of take a look at it. Jesse, who our engineer, one of our lead engineers, has done a great job of implementing it and tweaking it to sort of our needs. Fairly typically, then that goes into AWS. We use S3 for our kind of data repository in our lake, and then Redshift as our kind of main database, which we refer to as the truth, so we call it the truth. And essentially, what comes out of there is like the business sort of signed off kind of single source of the truth, which we then go and split. Unfortunately, we split and we use two tools. We use Tableau, which I think you're going to hear from Sophie this evening about, which is I'm really looking forward to seeing what Sophie's able to do with Tableau, because we're sort of getting started. But we also use a really nice tool called Looker as well. Looker's not as rich in terms of its kind of visualization capability, but it basically what you do is you define your data model across all of your tables, all of your databases and connections, all through sort of Git, and then essentially what it does is it translates that then into custom SQL. So when a user comes along, they have essentially a drag and drop interface to build their own reports and their own dashboards, and it runs it all dynamically. And so it's nice because you don't have to like manage the underlying data. You can essentially customize with the views that you have, customize the definitions that you have. And so it's kind of we use it essentially as our mass data tool. So, everybody pretty much in the business has access to Looker, and so we've got pretty much everything in there. Whereas Tableau we use for some more of the kind of detailed analysis and more interactive tools like in marketing and in our shop team. One other thing that I wanted to call out, which we're working on and we're really excited about, is actually starting to push data out of our sort of BI platform and into our third parties. So you'll see in a little while that we've built an attribution model as an example, and we're kind of trying to operationalize it is still actually been a bit of a challenge for us. The sort of the marketing teams are essentially working in their marketing platforms. So the Facebook team manage their campaigns in Facebook, then the Google guys manage their campaigns in AdWords. And so there's always this kind of frustration. They're seeing one number in their system and then they're obviously seeing the truth in our system. And so what we're starting to do now is kind of push some of that data back out. So on a daily basis, that the guys will be able to see essentially two numbers side by side. And if we can get it to the point where it's reliable enough and we're in a position where it's sort of production ready, actually we might be able to start switching the Facebook algorithm, for example, to start optimizing towards our number and not their number. And so that has some implications around making sure that sort of our ETL system is a production ready system, making sure that the uptime on it's good, but ultimately really quite an exciting opportunity for us to really influence the way that we target. Okay. So we're, in absolute terms, we're a small team, but given the size of the business, we're pretty big. I think we're about 10% of all employees, and we've really invested very, very early in a fantastic engineering team. So Jesse, who's here, Alex, who's on a 6-week holiday. He's always on holiday. He's not around at the moment, and so we've brought Raban in, who's quite the character to cover as well, while Alex is away. For those of you leading teams or managing teams here, Absolutely. I just think, the engineering guys are absolutely fundamental to what you go on to achieve. There's probably some engineers in the room who are very happy that I said that, but it's true. Couldn't do it without the team. One thing I would recommend is don't let them come up with their own job titles. Jesse calls himself the truth engineer, and Alex calls himself the ETL whisperer, which I still don't really understand. But really, kind of fundamental part of what we can achieve within the team. And so then we've got a couple of analysts. So we've got Hannah and Florence, Hannah sort of focuses specifically on marketing and Florence on product, the dedicated resource to both of those teams. We've got the incredible Jenna, who is currently on maternity leave, but she's our head of insight, so she leads our kind of qualitative research. We do all of our own insight in-house. And then there's me, and I do a bit of everything. That's Maddie, my daughter. Together we kind of, we cover all of the bases across the business. So I was going to talk a bit about sort of marketing, the way that we're sort of supporting marketing in shop, because while they're I think we're dealing with some fairly classic problems in both those areas. We're pretty pleased with where we've got to. It's not perfect, but we've come a long way in a relatively short time. So I want to talk a bit about that. The key thing really from a marketing perspective is, as I touched on, is that we've built our own in-house attribution model, which we're super excited about. So those of you, I won't go into attribution, there's a whole topic in itself. But essentially we've built what's called a multi-touch attribution model. So what we look at is all of the digital touch points, where thankfully in e-commerce business only, we don't have to deal with offline, which makes obviously our life a bit easier. And classically, previously, we were looking at last click attribution. So essentially, the last session that a customer came through, that channel got all of the credit. And so what you're losing there is sort of, the influence and the effect and the build-up effect that multiple channels can have on a purchase journey, and making, and sort of give you a slightly skewed view about where you should be investing your money. And so at the moment we have essentially a rules-based model, and we have two components to it. So we have a position-based model, which essentially gives some credit to the first and the last clicks, and then shares out the distribution in the middle, and we call that Smile. We call that Smile because it looks like a smile. And we use that. We had that running for everything, and actually we realised that didn't necessarily make sense for repeat. It makes sense for acquisition. It doesn't necessarily make sense for sort of repeat purchasers who actually, with things like email and retargeting campaigns and stuff like that, actually kind of has a build-up effect. And so we're sort of moving our repeat customers to a time decay model, which we're thinking about calling Smirk, because between the two of them kind of makes sense. But we build it all in-house. And so the way that it works, just very quickly, is essentially we've got every, as I said, digital touch point that we can find from our customers, and we build up essentially a user level session profile. So to begin with, and we split essentially, we build essentially chains. So for every order that the customer has made, or if they haven't made yet, we essentially create a chain that is specific to that order. So what it enables us to do is essentially stack, our kind of marketing spend and our kind of customer behavior to a particular order. And there's a million ways that we then use that from a kind of profitability understanding perspective, kind of particular journeys. But that's kind of the guts of the system. We then do a pretty nice thing where we insert impressions as well. So one of the difficult things, obviously, from a digital perspective, is if a customer's only seen the ad and haven't clicked it, you're not capturing that on your website, but that, that the customer is being exposed to your advertising. And so what we get from our partners are, if an order has taken place, we only have this for customers who have converted. We can see how many sort of ad impressions they were given sort of throughout the journey, so that's time-stamped, and that's really useful. But the benefit of that as well is that we kind of get this bonus sort of prize with Facebook, because Facebook obviously advertised to kind of individuals across devices. Facebook also gives us a really nice sort of view of cross-device that we wouldn't have necessarily had otherwise. So we do some other things like, in our emails, we sort of push the customer token in so that we can sort of try and identify if they do sort of, if they did look on sort of previous journeys. But Facebook also gives us this information as well, which allows us to sort of tie across, as I mentioned, browse mobile first, come back later to purchase on another journey, which is really cool. We then do a lot of cleaning. This actually is where I think, in my experience of sort of working with attribution vendors in the past, actually it's the cleaning of the data that often is where attribution models fall down. I mean, I don't know, it's probably 60% of the effort in the model is cleaning, because often the data that you get in is a mess, and so we do a variety of things around cleaning up the campaigns, redefining the campaigns. If we need to, literally, somebody will manually type in this UTM tag is for this campaign if we have to. But then also do things like stitching of sessions. So Google will cut sessions in half if it goes over midnight, or if it goes off to a payment provider and comes back. And so we kind of do that cleaning to make sure that we're identifying correctly the different sessions to each other. And then we do something called what we call tree shaking, which is essentially making sure that all of the money that we put into the system properly sort of is accounted for throughout. So sometimes often from the good kind of publishers we get the data in at the ad level, but sometimes we only get it at the campaign level. So we have to kind of make sure that spend is evenly distributed out across all of the individual touch points. So if anyone's interested, Jesse will very gladly talk about tree shaking. We then apply our rules, which I won't go into a huge amount of detail, but they're partly sort of industry standard, partly based on our analysis, partly based on some experiments that we've run that have kind of helped inform what our rules are. We have built, kind of macro media mix models, but to be honest with you, we found they were kind of giving us the same answer that our sort of touchpoint model was giving us, and so we've ended up kind of sticking with our touchpoint model, which you'll see some more reasons why in a second. And then the final thing we do, which is pretty cool, is we debated this quite a lot, and this is one of the things that was tricky to implement, and we're only now just launching a new version this week that hopefully fixes some of the bugs that we've got. But one of the things that we saw from the data quite quickly was actually this build-up effect. So if I spend £100 on Facebook yesterday, I'm going to be getting conversions from that £100 for a number of weeks into the future. And what we learned was that actually we could effectively put that into the model. So you don't have to wait a month to kind of see what the return would be like, or you don't have this kind of weird effect where basically your conversions are kind of building up over time. And so we essentially project forward what we think the final return will be based on what the conversions were yesterday, and then on day 2 we'll actualize and recalibrate and reforecast. And so the idea is that as much as possible we try and give the marketing team an as accurate read as possible. So it still takes into account things like the effectiveness of the targeting, the effectiveness of the conversion rates, but it kind of gives that projection, which is pretty cool. But we also get some additional benefits, as I was mentioning. So one of the things that we're also able to do with it, so we ran a pretty major TV campaign last Christmas, which was great, which was really successful for us. And we were all kind of like a bit nervous about it because it was a lot of money. And so we ended up looking at it in a variety of different ways. As I mentioned, a higher level kind of macro media mix model, fairly standard kind of regression analysis, top down. We spent this, we got that, what effect did the individual channels have. We did an on-site survey, which actually for us works really well. We get like a 40% response rate. So if we were going to do anything, that would be the thing that you'd start with, because you get a pretty good view quite quickly. But what we learned actually looking at the survey and looking at the model was really the majority of the TV, because we're still a relatively small business that, you guys over-index in terms of awareness. For us, we're still relatively unknown. That actually the lift we got just in pure brand terms was very directly attributable to television. And so we ran a pretty standard kind of causal inference on essentially looking at brand only. And so we could be really confident, because we've got the digital touch points, were these customers coming to us for the first time through branded traffic and through branded terms. And the day that we ramped up our spend on TV, we saw it grow. We essentially saw it grow as we sort of built up the spend, and ultimately we were able to measure what we thought was our incremental uplift. And so the nice thing about that, yes, it doesn't take into account perhaps the halo effect that TV might also be having on Facebook, but from the macro model we could see that was, not minimal, but it was sort of negligible in the overall sort of scheme. And so essentially when we were measuring it, we were kind of looking at, well, if we can get this to be profitable, then we're really confident that we're breaking even, when we're getting a positive return on our activity. Plus we get the benefit then of being able to do some additional things around, which parts of the country were working better than others, and ultimately trying to tie it down to sort of individual customers as much as possible. So that's pretty cool. The other thing that was a huge sort of retrospective benefit from the data was learning about these times to convert. So I talked about the ramp up curve and the projections that we had. That curve didn't change for the entire year, except when we got to Christmas. And so it's kind of obvious now that it would change, but at the time we didn't have the data from the previous Christmas. And so what you're looking at essentially is Q4, so October, November, December, by day, the customers that we acquired, the visitors that we first acquired to the website, kind of broken out by whether they converted on the day. So we like them the best, the green line. So we have a pretty good conversion rate for an e-commerce site. Whether they came back later, but then ultimately didn't convert. So this is their ultimate status, I should say. Whether the purple line, whether they didn't buy on the day, but they came back later and bought at some point, or the yellow line, which they didn't buy and they never came back. So it's a pretty common mix, I think, for most retailers. What was really fascinating, though, for those of you who sort of spotted it, that behavior. I mean, the sort of pre-October, as I said, was like the most boring chart you'll ever see. It's exactly the same every month. But in November, something very dramatic happened. So like literally the first Monday in November, it's almost like this just trigger point in terms of which people switch into kind of Christmas shopping mode. And what we saw was just a huge spike, essentially, of people who became much more likely to come back later on at some point and buy it. And then sort of as we started to get into sort of post-Cyber Day, into sort of very early December, that started to the reverse again and kind of go back to kind of the sort of the normal state. And eventually, as we got sort of later and later into December, people are then just gradually less likely to sort of even buy at all on the day. Things like shipping times and stuff like that became a factor for us, and it started to sort of degrade. And so for us, that has a pretty major learning for us, and something that we'll play into next year. So what we essentially know now is that we can put more money into the beginning of November. And we won't expect to see exactly the same. We'd expect some marginal sort of loss in the performance, but what we do know is that sort of early December is going to be our most expensive time to acquire. It's the most competitive, and as we saw, the likelihood of customers kind of putting more money into November is going to give us an opportunity to hopefully build up a much bigger sort of potential customer base for that. I'm going to talk very quickly about loyalty because the pizza's arrived. I've got quite a lot to get through, so I'll go quick. Loyalty for us is a bit of a work in progress. So we've only really just started properly investing time in it, but it's becoming increasingly important. With the new product roadmap that we've got coming, we think we've got a huge amount of opportunity. I am going to go through this very quickly. So what we're doing is we've built essentially a sort of a proper single customer view of every touch point that we can identify from a customer. So things like their sessions, whether they opened emails, whether they contacted the service center, what they actually did on site, have they seen a book, maybe not they haven't bought it, but they've seen it, or they've been to the blog. We sort of built the sketch and realized at the last minute we'd forgotten to put transactions, which is a bit of a mistake, but it's in there now. But it's a really incredible, it's basically to form the basis of all of our modeling and all of our tracking. And then ultimately we think we can start pushing some of this data into our email systems like we have started to with Facebook. And so we're doing all the usual things around sort of looking at cohort development. We're learning about when are the sort of most likely times that customers will come back. Naturally, we're obviously doing a bit of marketing, of course, to these customers, but we want to start influencing that. We know that the first 4 to 6 weeks are really crucial. Christmas, of course, is a huge opportunity for us to get customers back. New product launches are kind of in the mix there, customer anniversaries, so they're coming back for the same child's birthday or things like that. But also we're starting to think about how can we try and create more occasions. So if we acquire a customer, how do we try and sort of create more occasions where they can perhaps buy for a different child. Also, one of the things that we're learning about, and Hannah, who's over in the corner, hi Hannah, has done a really great piece of work on this, is trying to start now understanding the effect or the sort of the behavior of the sort of the gifter's relationship to the child. And so we'd never really seen this before in any sort of scale until this year, and we're starting to learn some really interesting things about it. Surprisingly, actually, we had a bit of a straw poll, but parents are one of our sort of lowest groups in terms of, like, at the moment anyway, lifetime value. They make smaller orders on the first order, and then they're less likely to come back, so about 12% less likely to come back. So we've got some working hypothesis around the research tells us that parents, they kind of, as a new parent myself as well, you kind of buy everything for the kid, and so actually the Lost My Name book in particular, we think is bought more sort of more by aunts and uncles and grandparents. They're kind of our bigger segments, and they're the most likely to come back. And sort of that's important for a few things. So one around lifetime value projections, and therefore kind of what are your CPA targets could potentially be different per relationship, but also crucially around our kind of how do we communicate to these customers through our CRM. We've seen a little while. There's we know that they've got sort of different emotional rewards and things like this, and so we know it's become important, and so we're really starting to invest some time in making sure that we know this for all of our customers. So we actually know it in our English-speaking markets for almost 3/4 of our customers now, which is pretty good. And we get that from a variety of sources. So our biggest source is the dedication. So this is quite, took us a long time to sort of, technically we knew we could do it. It's not a difficult sort of, text mining operation. It's sort of like legally, from a sort of privacy perspective and from our terms and conditions, can we? The answer we got from our lawyers is yes. But then we're kind of into like, ethically, should we do it? Because these are quite private messages. These are intensely sort of personal, and so it just feels a bit icky, frankly. But we kind of reconciled ourselves. They're completely anonymized. People don't have access to this data without the right authority. We use it from, again, at the moment, an insight perspective, and we will use it for sort of sensible CRM sort of projects going forward. We obviously then also get some of it from our surveys. We recently just added it to our site as well at the point of purchase, which is great. But it sort of kind of left us with this sort of, because we're getting quite greedy. We were starting, we got that, then we got this, then we got that. We sort of like, well, how are we going to figure out the rest of them? And we're sort of toying with this, and we've done a bit of exploration, and we think this is going to work. But we think we can infer it, at least for some relationships, from a variety of kind of sources, and effectively build a classification model that does it. And our working title is probably a granny, or they're probably a granny model. But like, seriously, we're seeing this, right? So obviously, to a certain extent, we get some of this from Facebook, not always, in terms of the audience targeting, but we're seeing sort of things like types of the day of the week that they come, the time of the day, the type of browser or device that they're on. It's all classically stereotypical stuff. But genuinely as well, they do take longer to make the book on the website as well. They take a lot longer than sort of, for example, the aunts and uncles. And so we think that we might be able to get to a level where we're saying probably they're a grandparent. And as I said, as we start, maybe even we use it as a way of essentially sort of excluding people or sort of, deducing who we think they might be. That'll influence the way that we then start communicating to them. Okay. Very quickly on Shop. So Shop is our e-commerce platform. We sort of do a lot of work to help them. Fairly classic stuff around our conversion funnel. So where does the traffic come from? Where does it land? And how do they get through the journey? All pretty standard stuff. We do a lot of kind of like micro-analysis, but one interesting thing that we saw quite quickly was targeted traffic is essentially people we've targeted on Facebook and Instagram and those sorts of networks. Intent is things like Pinterest and Google non-branded search. So people who are looking for something that we've bidded on from a keyword perspective. And what's really interesting is that while the intent traffic does actually convert better overall, they're actually weirdly much less likely to sort of get through the first step. And so one of the things that we're sort of thinking about is how can we essentially have different landing pages and different landing experiences that affect, kind of talk to those customers. And then sort of this kind of second stage where they're like then at the point of sort of they've made the book and they're looking at it, trying to understand, well, why are kind of people dropping out. We've started running a why no buy survey on the website, and we're seeing some really interesting results from that, which I'll touch upon in a little bit. We're also trying some really interesting new stuff. If anyone in the room this resonates with, come and see us after, because I'd love to pick your brains on it. But we've kind of got this, the guys in the sort of Shop team spend a lot of time watching videos, and the conversion funnels get you so far, so you kind of know that broadly speaking, there's a problem in this part of the journey. We kind of got this idea of essentially looking at, well, because we're effectively got quite a linear journey and quite a simple journey, it's going to get more complex as we add more products. But essentially, you see the book, you make the book, you buy the book. I mean, if I really sort of strip it down, we kind of got this idea about sort of trying to look at, well, like what can we quantify essentially deviations from that? Can we actually quantify what people would kind of refer to as friction? Do we see certain stages where people are more likely to go back than forwards? Are we seeing stages where people are going for the help? Are people getting errors? The obvious things, and kind of trying to quantify that, and then looking across different devices, markets, and saying, well, there's definitely something about that particular piece of interaction that is not working, and maybe even then going a stage further and saying we're working with the LSE on this at the moment, who are building us a logistic regression model around like, well, which of those actually matter, like which of those are actually important, which of those deviations actually have a material effect on the likelihood of somebody purchasing or not. And that's the stuff that we can then start honing in on and prioritizing through the kind of usability studies, and really trying to understand, well, what is it about that step that's confusing people. Of course, do a lot of A/B testing. I won't go through this much. Just one interesting point. Tom, who's our head of shop, did a really great piece of analysis last year where he basically looked at all the A/B tests we'd ever run, categorized them by the type of, Tom over there, looking very proud of himself. Looking at essentially, were they product related, were they about reducing friction, were they about increasing motivation, and kind of categorize whether they had a positive uplift, a negative uplift, or negative impact, or they didn't really make much difference. And kind of what Tom discovered was our biggest and most successful sort of lever was around social proofing. And so things like kind of changing copy to sort of talk about, talking about the fact and celebrating the fact that we've sold like millions of these books. The screenshot I took on that's wrong. Obviously, we haven't sold that many, but we added that kind of counter to the website, and that had a big deal. And we've recently introduced sort of different formats of the book, so a higher price point and things like this. And so, again, kind of calling out, best rated, highest selling, et cetera, are really working for us. But I think this is one of the areas, and this is all at the moment just like ideas and stuff that we've been discussing. We haven't kind of got into the detail of yet, but we've got some sort of data to try and build business cases for. But I think one of the things that's really exciting about Lost My Name is our opportunities for personalization. So we can do all the usual kind of on-site stuff around, like if I know that you're a particular diversity, or you're buying for a particular child, et cetera, we can personalize those things. As Jesse, we could the site could look and feel different. Also all of the guys at the back of the room are our in-house kind of content and creative team, so we can totally do all of those things. One of the things we can also do is, because the books and the actual products themselves just don't exist until the point at which someone creates them, I think we've got a lot of opportunity to sort of be playing around with that. We, as I say, need to kind of scale it and decide where is it in terms of ROI opportunities, but we think it's got some legs. And so, for example, I noticed this when I was sort of coming for sort of my interview, that if you sort of create the book for me, or for Ryan, or for anyone with a R, you get the robot, and the robot turns out to be happy, and it all ends well. But he's quite miserable, and it's quite dark, and it's quite dingy, and it's if you're a girl and you're getting the same, you're getting the sort of same view, which you do at the moment. We don't customize the characters for a gender. I remember seeing it and thinking, actually, well, if I was a grandparent in the US or something, I wouldn't necessarily associate that. So I'm absolutely not gender stereotyping. I bought Maddie, my daughter, superheroes and Kingdom of You, but what we see absolutely is that we have got like this rabbit option, right, which is much more kind of colourful, like basically more feminine. And what we see like categorically is that people do swap, right? So if you're buying for a girl, nearly two-thirds swap out the robot for the rabbit. And so we know at the point of the journey, and the same pattern exists for other characters. They swap elephants out and things like this. And so these biases exist, and while we don't want to necessarily reinforce those, like ultimately we want to sell as many products as possible and then look for conversion opportunities. And so as we're sort of within the creation journeys, we learn more about the child, maybe the occasion that they're trying to buy for. We've got this unique opportunity to effectively literally just change the thing that we're trying to sell them based on what we could learn, the more likely to convert. It's a bit of an edge case, but it's just really interesting as well. Like we have this angel character who's a bit of a rocker, and she's really cool and she's really fun. That hated is probably a strong word, but we got a lot of complaints about her in the US, particularly in the South. I'm not making it up, it's true. We got a lot of tickets to the point where we basically just had to take her out as the default character and put the aardvark in. I just remember thinking it was a real shame, like why would we drop her out in some places? Why wouldn't we just, why don't we just learn basically where, you should show the different characters. And just very quickly, finally on this, I think as well we can potentially go a stage further. So Kingdom View, as I sort of talked about earlier on, it's kind of got all these really cool options. When you start thinking about the sort of the age of the child and the gender of the child, we've only been selling this book for like a week and a half, and we're already seeing these biases. We all just guess which ones are going to be the most popular for each group, and we're totally seeing it already. So it's kind of sad, but if people are buying for girls, they're much more likely to buy it for princesses. If they're buying for young children, it's quite neutral, and it's animals. As they get older, it's a bit more sort of dinosaurs and superheroes. Girls do unfortunately still stick with princesses sort of throughout. And so again, look, we work very hard. The creative team work very hard to not sort of create stereotypes and things like this, but actually ultimately, customer choice is kind of telling us a lot from it. And also, could we go even a stage further? One of the things we did before we launched Kingdom of You is we surveyed our customers, and so it's biased because they're our customers, but we kind of get this relative comparator. And one of the things that we learned, the red looks quite harsh, that's still a very high score, but what we learned very quickly, and it sounds obvious, but it's quantifiable, is that essentially, because the book is kind of celebrating the child and their favorite things, what we found was as you kind of get away in terms of your relationship from the child, you become, we were told, customers telling us that they'd be less likely to buy it. And so what's interesting about that is, we sort of talk a lot about in our kind of copy and our content, pick the child's favorite things, what's their biggest obsession, they sort of demonstrate that you know the child really well, is something that we sort of currently push in our marketing. And that's kind of like, but what if you don't know the favorite thing? What if you're, does that put pressure on you? Does that, we see this, as I said, in our kind of survey data that, yes, a lot of customers said they'd go and find out and come back again, but ultimately we want to be trying to sort of convert as many as possible. So perhaps, certainly from a CRM perspective, if we know, sort of that your relationship, perhaps we can do some quite nice subtle things around the language and maybe emphasize sort of different components of the book. But we'll see. Cool. Very, very quickly, because I'm not sure what the time is and how much longer I've got. I'll be quick, because the pizza's getting cold. But really, again, sort of what I think is really interesting here is we have this opportunity to use data in the creative process. And so, at least from my experience, I've never sort of seen a business do this. It's not something you usually associate with sort of data science and BI. But they absolutely love it, which is fantastic. And so we did some very quick and early things, some pretty obvious stuff around, again, the age of child, the occasions that are being bought for, and so obviously things like Christmas, is huge for us, and sort of birthdays and stuff like that. But what we saw when we retrospectively looked at the journey home. So the journey home's been, I think, out for about 18 months, certainly more than a year. When we looked back at the data for that, what we could see is that actually where Lost My Name was slightly more skewed towards sort of very young children, the journey home was sort of skewing a little bit more towards slightly older children, which kind of makes sense given Lost My Name is just a fairly sort of simple book, whereas Journey Home is a little bit more of a sophisticated story. And so, kind of if you think about it, particularly if it's for a young girl, like if you bought Lost My Name for a newborn or a 1-year-old, the journey home isn't necessarily like a natural next product for that child. Obviously you can buy Lost My Name for other children, or you can buy the journey home for other children. But in terms of like association, it's pretty small relationship. And so that data now has been sort of put into the product roadmap in a really meaningful way. So what the team upstairs have been sort of looking at, Nick, who heads up our sort of product studio, has sort of really built this in. And so, so if you buy Lost My Name for a newborn, by the end of this year, we'll have more products that we can either kind of cross-sell you on the journey itself, or we can kind of sell you later on through our CRM. Similarly for, sort of specifically looking at birthday occasions, we are very heavily skewed towards Christmas, but trying to create sort of extra opportunities around birthdays, and extra products there. And then gradually, obviously, as sort of children get older, kind of gradually moving into the kind of the 6+ with some more kind of forms that we think is going to be really important. So by the end of the year, we'll have a lot more opportunity within our kind of loyalty and our on-site sort of personalization and recommendations to sort of push that through. And I kind of touched upon this very briefly, but this is a really incredible piece of work that Jenna did around really understanding kind of gift or emotional rewards. And I won't go through a huge amount of it now, but essentially it's around how do you really tap into like the reasons why people are buying for the child. What do they get out of it? Basically gifting is inherently selfish according to Jenna when you get into it, and it's as much about kind of how it makes you feel as how you think it'll make the child feel. And so again, kind of touching on, well, actually, can we sort of play on some of those emotional rewards within our content strategies and our kind of communication strategies? And then I think this is the last bit, I promise. We also get to kind of retrospectively kind of go back and also just improve our products as well, which is something that we've, Tal, who's our founder, will talk about Lost My Name, was just this iterative process. It got better and better and better over time. We've sort of changed our last and first pages because we learned that they'd work better in our advertising and all these sorts of things. We can kind of change our product range because we don't have this inventory to sort of manage. We can change it, overnight if we wanted to. And the journey home is a really interesting story. The journey home used to look like this. And it's essentially the same story, but what much darker again. And sort of, customers didn't necessarily get that it was actually about home. They thought it was about the alien guy. And so it's a little bit confusing around that. But one of the things that was really interesting, again, from the data perspective, is when you look at it, only about 30% of the journey home was being sold to girls, whereas Lost My Name is like 50-50 down the line. The car game's 50-50, the post is 50-50. The journey home is much, massively over-indexes on boys, which essentially says, well, if you're coming to shop for a girl, you're way less likely to be buying it than the Lost My Name, which obviously for us is a challenge. And so the guys put a lot of time into essentially reskinning it, as I mentioned, making the sort of proposition around it being the home much clearer. And overnight, pretty much, we saw essentially a 25% increase in the conversion rate of people buying it for girls, which is huge. We still haven't got to 50-50, probably never will get to 50-50. There's a lot of centuries of kind of gender stereotyping to overcome there, but it's it's a real step in the right direction. Actually, just the fact that we can learn that this was an opportunity and build a business case around means that we can continuously improve the stuff that we sell. One other really interesting opportunity with the journey home we were finding, we linked it, as I mentioned, to our kind of surveys, was that a lot of customers were really struggling with this page, which is essentially the address page. Either the geocoding engine wasn't working or the satellite imagery just wasn't good enough. And so, quantifiably, we were seeing this as being a really important reason. So, as I said, the conversion rate on that stage, or versus the equivalent for Lost My Name, was much lower. When we looked at our surveys, we could see that price will be the highest in almost any business you'll ever go and look in, or availability for other businesses as well, as we know from M&S was a big factor. For us, we don't have an availability problem, but the customers are telling us very specific issues with that particular product. To the point where we sold about 400 of these, I think it was in the end, where is the child's house in the circle, and it's obviously fucking not, but like, yeah. But I mean, it was incredible. I mean, so we went back and apologized to those customers and refunded. Well, we sent them new versions of the books. One lady on the video, bless her, she was sort of she noticed it was weird, but sort of like, oh, maybe that's what my house looked like before it was built. It's like, it's like they didn't have satellite images then. But anyway, bless her. But we could see this was a sticking point, right? So we knew this was a challenge. There was a very specific error around the geocoding, which got fixed quite quickly, but still was an opportunity for us. And so they kind of come up with this concept of less address journey home, which basically is the same journey, except if you don't know the child's address, because not everybody knows the child's exact address as well, and children move, families move, obviously, and so we were seeing people are a bit worried about it being this kind of permanent address that they were sort of staying to. And so what we now offer is essentially a picture essentially that looks like the satellite image. We sort of again emphasizing the house, and so I think it's really interesting. So we're about to launch this, I think either this week or next week, to see sort of what it does. So we think it's got up to a 7% conversion improvement for us. But it's a really fascinating discussion. You kind of got this sort of the tension between sort of like the commercial sort of imperative of wanting to sell more of these things versus the kind of creative sort of, but it's not the USP of the book, and these sorts of things. And it's like, let's just find out, right? Let's find out whether or not it makes sense to do. Does it drive higher conversion rates? If it works, actually, it helps us as well in other ways. If we can go to other countries more easily, we don't have to license Bing Maps necessarily, which is what we use. And so we'll see how that goes. Okay. that's my talk. I just want to very quickly, I've already squared this with Adam, I have a shameless plug that we're hiring. We're unfortunately losing Jesse in a few weeks' time, and so we're on the hunt for a data engineer. If you are a data engineer and interested, or if you know one who you think would be interested, we'd love to have a chat, and yeah, come and see us. That's it. Cool.